Take a big sip of my gamer girl piss. And let's
I
get
think it was
started.
great how you did that right as there was a motorcycle revving right by your house.
That's me getting cranked for the podcast. I'm getting
it's a
revved up.
It's an excite bike in your brain.
That's exactly that's my podcast noise. That's how I help center myself before podcasts. Anyway, I shall begin the introduction. Hello everyone and welcome back to Video Games Are the Worst Thing on Earth. I am your host Alton. With me as always is Reese.
Yo!
And today we have a special guest with us, Terry Bolvanga. How do you pronounce
Bolvanga.
Bolvanga. Okay.
Like a kangaroo.
Bolvangaroo.
What up, Terry?
How's it going, folks?
And we have something very different for you today, I think. We've got, instead of focusing on gamers and how repulsive they are, which we might talk about at some point, but today's episode is mainly going to be focused upon video game music. And it's going to be something very personal, because we're not just going to go through, top 10 songs that we love from video games. Each of us has picked 5 songs from when we were growing up that really sort of stuck with us, and we're going to talk about those games and what they meant for us and what we were, what we remember about them when we were growing up. And I think it's going to be very interesting and insightful, and we learn more about each other.
Alton and I don't quite have as good a music background. We have invited our good friend Terry to have strong, nerdy, music-based opinions.
I'm the professional here.
Yes.
Exactly.
Clinging by a thread, but nevertheless.
He has a SoundCloud and everything. It's incredible. I'm assuming you have a SoundCloud, so that joke works.
No one gets to know that.
Oh, okay.
No one gets to know that. That's a pet project. I am just of the scholarly bourgeois when it comes to video game music.
The lofty heights of video game music appreciation.
He's a doctor of Super Nintendo tunes, and that's why we had him on.
That's the only good stem is chiptune.
Imagine if Elon Musk decided that he was gonna make chip tunes with Grimes. Oh, Jesus Christ!
I don't even know.
Up.
Wait, is that official?
Well, there seems to be a lot of indicators that they've broken up. 1, Elon Musk is extremely embarrassing. 2, they've unfollowed each other on all the social media, which is, to me, as close as a confirmation as you can get in these crazy days.
In the year of your Lord 2018, that's just what it is. You see that unfollow come in, and it's shit's over.
Yeah, so my dream of Elon Musk Grimes chiptune music of Dr. Mario theme song remixes is just never gonna come to fruition, I'm afraid.
God, imagine sad. Grimes working on a new album and he's like, you should sample the F-Zero song.
Hey Grimes, did you know that there's this really cool video game called Mortal Kombat, and I think it has a really cool theme song that you can incorporate into your music?
I love how your impression of Elon Musk's voice is super German.
It is.
It's not the first time German Elon Musk has visited the podcast. I doubt it'll be the last.
All right. You want to get us into this first pick and tell us what you picked as your number 1 pick?
When you guys pitched kind of what we were doing in this episode to me, and you were like, pick songs that you remember fondly from your upbringing and stuff, and not just stuff that you think is really good music that you might not even have a super kind of a big affinity for the game.
Right.
And so it did get me to think about certain games that I played a lot growing up, but might not even really think about anymore because I've just kind of grown up and gotten past it, but then also had music that was really kick-ass. One of the songs that I chose was from King of Fighters Round 2, which was for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, which I'm very sad that I do not have that anymore. I lost that sometime or another because that's quite a rarity. The song that I chose is pretty similar to like the Mortal Kombat theme song. You could hear it there. This is just a hella chiptune song. This is what I was listening to as I was screaming because I didn't know how to do diagonal Z uppercut punches.
Dope.
Of course, you guys are in tune.
Yeah, I really dug that. I'm not familiar with the Neo Geo Pocket at all, but that kind of chiptune sound sounds really good. Is the music in general with the Neo Geo Pocket, is that different or have any kind of or if you know, from like the Neo Geo in general, or is it trying to emulate that?
Well, one of the interesting things that I found out from like looking up these King of Fighters soundtracks is, this particular soundtrack for round 2 it's very slim pickings like uploaded on YouTube and stuff like that. So this is really one of the only maybe 4 or 5 songs that I could hear isolated unless I was going to try and listen to it from like someone doing a playthrough of the game. But what I found out as well is that, they've uploaded, the soundtracks from like the more proper King of Fighters games on like, the bigger consoles and stuff like that. They basically, it's like the same songs, but bigger arrangements since, the technological capabilities, like there was more memory that they could use and stuff. So these songs that were on round 2 were very much kind of boiled down to meet kind of those requirements of a handheld gaming device. But at the same time, like I think that's such a perfect way to show like, again, sort of the art through adversity of like having to limit something down, but still making it sound like a cool ass thing. They have a lot of different kind of like synth voices going on in that song in particular.
Not that in any way, shape, or form having more options and bigger budget or whatever makes for a worse song, but there's a couple of songs from my list too that has that stripped down chiptunes aesthetic. And it's like, I don't know if it's nostalgia or what. It really is satisfying to listen to in a way that a more robust version, like people do orchestral covers of Mega Man 2 music, etc. all the time. It doesn't hit that same sweet spot in a way, and I don't know why that is, but I definitely think that's true.
I have a lot of thoughts about like the elaborate covers of very modest video game songs. I will probably get into it more as we kind of listen to more of these chiptunes. I don't want to like go overboard so early on.
One thing I want to contribute. This is a song that I did not put on my list. Ultima Underworld has a really, really dope intro theme. I think that it would be very difficult to capture the feeling of that song, trying to translate it from its original MIDI tune to an orchestral score. Do you know what I mean?
For sure.
It has a unique quality. Even the limitations of the technology gives it like a unique quality and feel that you can't really replicate by doing it the proper way, quote unquote. Anyway, yeah, so shifting completely away from chiptunes to actual orchestral soundtracks on CD in like the early 2000s. comes a game that I'm not sure a lot of people have heard about called Arcanum. But basically, Arcanum was developed by some of the ex-members of Black Isle and the people who developed Fallout. They created something that mechanically is very similar to Fallout, but setting is completely different. It's basically this world of magic that went through the Industrial Revolution. And the forces of technology and magic are basically in complete conflict with each other because it's kind of weird, but basically strong technology messes up magic and strong magic messes up technology. So like if you're a wizard, and you try to ride the train, they make you ride like the caboose that's like lined with lead or something to try and
Just
keep
like-
you from breaking the fucking train with your magic. And so it's a very unique concept and a very unique world, and I think that the music adds a lot of depth and feeling to it because it's sort of a very melancholy and kind of Victorian, and it does have some steampunk elements, but I don't think it's quite to the obnoxious level that modern internet culture would recognize it. So without further ado, I guess we'll just go ahead and straight up play this song. This is the intro music.
Let's listen.
Introduce me.
Cool.
I'm guessing the intro song for like the Technomancer characters in Arcanum are like way more like industrial dance music.
No, it all the music is done with a string quartet.
I gotcha.
So it like all the themes of the game are like that. Even the combat music is like super intense string quartet music, where they're like plucking chords, just really wailing on that bow.
A lot of trilling.
Yeah, and
What game? When did this game come out?
I think it was like 2001. Let me double check that.
One of the interesting things about sort of the growth of video game music and sort of becoming like I don't know. There's so many different phases to check it where it went from, kind of this element in a game that needed to be heavily restricted so that it wouldn't take away from kind of the memory of like just the actual game content in there and just how much it could actually work in whatever was in the cartridge and stuff, to being able to elaborate a little bit more on the sounds that are being used when, games got on bigger systems and stuff like that. And then there was also sort of this idea of like, we're going to go into kind of a subject that a lot of icky people like to talk about, but treating games as serious art. I think one of the big ways that you could see that with video games is when they were wanting to emulate sort of these elegant movie scores and affixing it to their games. And there are a lot of games that, of course, do that really well, as we see throughout here. But to go back to Reese's point, as we were talking some time ago, there is sort of a limitation that I feel about converting game music into this super elegant symphonic type of scoring, because I do enjoy the charm of your chip tunes. I do enjoy hearing kind of the limitations of some things and hearing what you're still able to do within those confines. Nevertheless, it's always nice to hear some very rich strings, as soothing or as intense as they can be.
Yeah, and I think too, most game music is going towards the goal of setting this kind of tone, and that you're going to be playing and spending a lot of time in this world for it's 99% of games, and so you need that extra kind of boost to kind of frame it and contextualize it, because this game would feel totally differently if it had like electronic dance techno theme to it versus that.
I really don't think that Arcanum would be improved with chiptunes. In fact, I think it would be very jarring, at least since, I grew up with this game. This is sort of the tone and feeling that I remember and is very heavily influenced by the music. And in a game that's sort of set in this Victorian era fictional fantasy setting, it makes a lot of sense to use something more classical, like a quartet, rather than going with something more minimalistic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying one size fits all, and again, like, you kind of go through the history of video game music evolving things, like game at the turn of the millennium, basically introducing like how much higher you can go in terms of what song choices you're going with.
Absolutely. One point I'd like to make with this is that there was a time when on PC games, there wasn't a great standardization of hardware. They had Sound Blaster, you had a couple of different ones. And then even with the release of CDs, PC took a lot of time to catch up in terms of video game music. Not to say that there was no good video game music on PC, but it wasn't standardized. A lot of times back then, people didn't even really have speakers or even like engage with PC, the sound aspect, as much. So I think it's interesting. Arcanum, there wasn't that much time between kind of like the standardization of PC hardware and Arcanum. So when it has this kind of like rich orchestral score, it's going for this kind of like cinematic idea that and soundscape that wasn't originally available on the PC until semi-recently, which in terms of the history of the game.
Yeah, that's very true. It's something that wasn't even possible around the time of like the Neo Geo and whatever. And Reese, you have a very good point that PCs lagged behind consoles in terms of sound for ages and ages until suddenly they were way better. And I think that shift kind of occurred with the move to CD, because now you could just straight up put music onto the disc along with the game. So you didn't have to go through like this kind of funky, this hardware interpretation of sheet music, basically, what you had with MIDI and other kinds of video cards. It just straight up just played like CD you'd buy from the store.
And I think it's interesting is it took a little while too, I think, for CD to catch up too, because a lot of times it's that the focus with these big CD games was it being entirely voice acted. So a lot of the space, the Seventh Guest, when it came out, it just kind of had these couple of sampled loops, and it was more around the video and the audio. And so I think that this is an interesting point in time, the early 2000s, when music in the PC grew.
So, Terry, do you have anything to add to that, or do you want to move on to
No, we're all good there. I don't want to speak a whole lot about a game I've never played. I feel like I'm disrespecting something that you very much enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of difficult just because I grew up with Arcanum. I really, really loved it. I beat the game like twice. It's incredible. It has a really good story. It's a shame that they were really rushed to finish it, and a lot of really interesting side quests had to be cut. But all in all, it is a stellar game, and people should check it out. If they like the old school Fallout, and if they like a kind of fantasy industrialization hybrid. But anyway, let's move on to Reese's pick, number 1.
This is UN Squadron, which outside of the Legacy is probably my favorite game, just in terms of I played the shit out of this. This is when I was a kid. It's a shmup where you're just in a plane and you got to kill a whole bunch of the other planes, but it's got the pretty high pixel production value, and the song and the sounds has always been just like really compelling and a part of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that once we listen to it. But yeah. All right, so it's a short loop, but to me, it really exemplifies the game. This is from the frontline base, the first mission in the game. And it's just, you're out in the open skies. It's a pretty easy level. And to me, just that kind of that chiptune feeling of you're flying, you're out, you're killing these bad guys. It just exemplifies the whole core of the game to me. And kind of like Super Nintendo music is definitely my favorite music as a genre of video game music. That, I don't know what you would call it, the sequencer or whatever that was within the Super Nintendo. I don't know. For whatever reason, I know there's been criticisms that it overly tinny or whatever, but to me, it's kind of like one of the best feelings in one of my favorite games.
For music to be considered good, it's not all about being the most immaculate quality possible, because then you're completely devoiding things of aesthetic if the only parameter that you're trying to set for deciding if a song is good or not is if it's created as sterilely as possible. Because there's obviously a virtue in having things that are kind of dirty or kind of low quality. I mean, people will talk about grunge and garage rock and stuff like that. Or, again, lo-fi synth music, as we're kind of talking about right here. I like that you put this song because, I think just kind of hearing all those different things, your little chiptune organ chords in there, that lead melody that's clearly trying to emulate like an electric guitar. I think it's such a good example of what you were hearing with so many different Super Nintendo songs, and what a lot of just a big demographic of the millennial generation who are playing these songs were, kind of ingesting as their, kind of music, whatever lobe in their brain is growing in terms of appreciating music. You can hear a lot of different things in there. One of the things that it actually reminded me of, like in that song in particular, was like, I think, again, sort of talking about that synth lead that's emulating an electric guitar. It's very much like the Mega Man X soundtracks, like from X1 to X3 or whatever. And, you know, I certainly played that game a lot. And
They're both Capcom games, so that makes sense.
yeah, I've never played this shoot 'em up. It's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up.
Yeah, and it's you know, it's like many that you've played, you know, Gradius or Life Force.
Did you ever play Super Earth Defense Force?
I don't believe I played that.
It's the Super Nintendo one. I do know that there's like a new game. I've never played it before, but that was like the side-scrolling shooter that I always played. I did not listen to the soundtrack to see if it would be up for consideration because I kind of figured out all of my picks, but that's a pretty good game. I should visit that soundtrack again.
One point I think it might be kind of interesting to make the difference in some of these picks that we have so far. I think that there might be something of like a slight intergenerational difference, because even though I believe we're all of the millennial generation, I think I might be slightly younger than you guys. I'm like 25.
We don't need to bring numbers into this.
And so it's sort of interesting to see the difference in how you guys have both selected a lot of chiptunes, and while I listened to, you know, a lot of MIDI music when I was a small babby. One Must Fall, 2087, and Ultima Underworld, which I've already mentioned, both of which are just fantastic tunes. And honestly, I could have picked some of those, but you know, we wanted to keep the list down for time purposes. But those are both very good.
I mean, I'll cop to it. I'm right on the Millie Gen X divide, so this is a different generation for sure.
And so I just wanted to just sort of highlight that as an interesting difference, in that I basically have no chiptunes in my list, because when I was sort of the most formative years, I would say when I was slightly older and more cognizant of what I was doing, were at that point all the PC games had switched over to, you know, soundtrack audio. So
yeah, before this episode, we really had to talk Alton doing the Halo 1 theme. We're just like, come on, dude. Like, everyone knows that one already.
Master Chief, he's so cool. I want to grow up to be just like him when I'm an adult. I want to be Master Chief.
The original pitch for this episode was just an hour-long discussion of the Halo 1 theme.
Yeah.
Doesn't that actual song play in like the final mission of Halo? I hardly remember that game.
It plays in the menu, man. It's like if you open up Halo, it goes, oh.
I think it plays at least a dozen times throughout the game.
Yeah.
It just keeps going. It's like a motif, but they play all 8 minutes of it.
You just like you fucking shoot a grunt in the face, and it's like, oh, giving the Covenant back their bomb.
That was. I thought we were listening to the bot.
It just like bait and switched it right there.
Yeah, I'm so good at the orchestral singing. Just like, damn.
But yeah, like, to kind of piggyback off of your point about how like we kind of have different, you know, set of choices between the three of us. Like, that was something that I was also really kind of taking into consideration when I was picking out my songs, was that like I also was hoping to like kind of fan out pretty well in terms of, you know, eras of sounds and like, you know, different generations of video games, and by video game standards, not by people standards. But even though that's already like a really wonky thing, but if I can pat myself on the back, I'm quite proud with my spread here.
I also pat you on the back.
Thank you. This is the only reason why I came here.
The softest back pats. All right, so Terry, you've got your next selection coming up.
This next one that I want to do is from the N64. This is, you know, kind of chiptune-y, but a little more like a little more elaborate, because this was for the N64 and stuff. But it's also very synth poppy. This is from the Snowboard Kid soundtrack. It's Green Valley. Yeah, that is a rough recording of that song. Just sort of noticing that. I mean, I guess I really took it to picking these weird rarities off that like are sort of uploaded to YouTube, but not immaculate.
I recorded on my iPod. My
I think
original iPod.
I'm
I
pretty
think
sure like the super old MP3 file that I have, which we couldn't play directly, is also basically the same version as YouTube, and also from LimeWire, like from the LimeWire era, if anyone remembers that.
I think it's interesting you picked an N64 song because N64 it's kind of weirdly a lost console in a lot of ways. It was popular, but most people I knew only had a handful of the biggest games. But watching speedrunning and stuff, there's so many other games that came out for it. A lot of them you can kind of understand the N64 aesthetic has that kind of rough blurriness.
It did not age gracefully.
Yeah,
Not like some of the 8-bit and 16-bit art.
and the just having like but the music from it, I think there's a lot of untapped potential. Like I like that track a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like it literally sounds like a Church's song from like over a decade before they were even a band.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I mean, this game as well too. Like has some seminal value for me. It was very fun to play as like a grade schooler, but also very aggravating and kind of had like a really stupid difficulty curve as well as not running that great in the grand scheme. Like it's one of those things where again you like play it, you revisit it as an adult and you're like, oh man, this runs like shit.
Yeah, back in the old Nintendo 64 days, I think when early 3D graphics, people for whatever reason seemed to think that 30 FPS was enough. Even on the Xbox, the original Xbox and PlayStation 2, there were a lot of games that just stuck to 30. Nowadays, I think, at least I'm incredibly spoiled with my video games that if it goes down below 60, I fill my big gamer dipe and throw my Mountain Dew across the like into a window.
It's very much like back then, like, yeah, I mean, that was the best you were going to get. And, you would just lap it up and stuff. And also, we were younger and we were stupid and we didn't really know how to play video games. Because that's the other thing that you find out when you revisit old games. You're like, oh, this is easy as shit. Like, why was I like such a dumbass kid and I couldn't figure out how to, beat
Oh.
the fucking snowboard dragon or whatever the fuck the boss
No,
was.
no, what's way worse than that is when you go back to a game you thought you were really fucking good at as a kid and you suck at it now. That's way worse. Played Quest for Glory 4, which is the one that's set in spooky Transylvania. And I went into a combat with a fucking vampire bunny, and I remember really loving fighting the bunnies when I was a kid because I was good at it. And then I tried it when I was older, and I was like, "What the fuck? How do I do this?" It's just like that's worse.
Terry and I have never experienced that.
I remember one thing I did experience particularly, and I feel like I'm not alone in this too, was again hanging out at a friend's house, like, and they have the N64, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna play all these games that I've been playing in a really long time. And one of the games I wanted to play, because I'm a big fan of RPGs, let's play Quest 64. I remember this game being fun. 15 minutes in, this game is fucking terrible. It's so bad. It's the worst thing in the world.
It is the worst thing on earth.
It is the worst thing on this earth and other earths. Game's still bad. They couldn't figure it out. Snowboard Kids, it really only holds up in terms of like, just me having an affinity for it. And like, I think a lot of games, particularly in that N64 era when they run really sluggish and chunky, it's just not going to be a good game in the grand scheme. But it's sort of like, well, I still want to play this. I still want to be the dude that has like black corn stalks for hair as we're looking in this thumbnail right here. And like, I want to be able to do the, windmill special trick and I want to be able to parachute people. That was probably one of the coolest things about the game is that you could shoot a parachute on someone and like stall them, on the course for like 20 seconds. You could leave and like grab a snack as you're like still getting owned in the air.
I think that this is a good track for kind of like our overall point of mood and setting the stage as well, because talking about the flaws in N64 games, you can listen to this track and you can see how much heavy lifting it's doing here in terms of looking at the box art, it's supposed to be fun and, this exuberant experience, and the Grass Valley music, you can tell, I assume was like a slightly easier stage that you had fun with, whatever. It's interesting in that way too, where just like how music can do the heavy lifting in a lot of situations.
Yeah, and now that you also bring up we're continuing to look at sort of this box art. All the characters have alarmingly large noses, so I hope we don't look into
triple parentheses. Snowboard kids.
I hope we don't look into Atlas and be like, oh, they had a past.
Oh man.
www.atlasandtheholocaust.com.
Oh no. All right, so are we ready to move on to our next song?
Yeah, let's go on to yours.
All right, this one comes from Lords of Magic, which is a turn-based / real-time strategy game that I played all the fucking time when I was a kid. This is related to the Lords of the Realm series, which I think is a lot more popular, but I didn't have that. I had Lords of Magic, and I loved it because I didn't know better. But it's still a really good game. I'm noticing a theme that I really love fantasy games. But to go back to my original point, me and Reese were talking about how when we were younger, we played the games we had a lot more than we used to. And so this is one of those games that I played every single faction. I beat it with like every single faction. I played every different type of character. I did all these different crazy like custom maps for it. And I guess it embedded itself into my childhood psyche just because I'd played it so much. But I think it's really, really cool. And we're going to play...
Absolutely, yeah.
We're going to play one of its tracks for the Life faction. And it's all, it's background... It's like background music, essentially. But it has a very unique feel. Every single faction, and there are about 8 of them, has unique music that goes along with their territory. So you'd have to listen to all of them to basically get an idea of how they are different and how they actually convey the sense of that element to you. So there's all these elements and they all have their opposites. So you have water and fire, earth and air, life and death, chaos and order. And
this sounds just like Heroes of Might and Magic.
Like I said, there's probably
have to cross-reference this soon enough.
Yeah, it probably has some inspiration. The one thing they did change from that is that when you get into a fight, it's real time. So instead of doing turn-based combat, it kind of switches to a more real-time combat and like kind of Baldur's Gate-esque where you can pause it at any time and strategize.
I gotcha.
And it's really fun, and they do a really good job making every single faction feel different and setting the tone with the music. And so without further ado, let's go and listen to the Life theme music.
What year did this come out?
97.
Damn, dude. That see like yeah, that I was really into partly because I could kind of tell like what inspiration like whoever was making this music was like taking from in terms of like I hate to put it in these terms, but like, real musicians. I don't mean that disparagingly, but obviously like between someone who's doing music as their sole career versus someone who is like composing for a video game soundtrack at that
Mhm.
time. Which is funny now because like we look at composers for video game music and they are musicians. But at the time too, like 97, this is around the time that Delirium had kind of come together. They split off from Frontline Assembly, who is an electro industrial band. And, they were electronic producers and they still did some industrial type of sounds, a little bit of EBM and stuff, but they also did a lot of world music and down tempo, which is exactly what this song was in particular, where you kind of have these ambient synth pads permeating and, a lot of choral, synths are just actual samples of like, kind of people doing lyricless singing and types of stuff like that. A lot of hand drums. And then in the middle of that, you kind of hear these permeating guitar harmonic travel about. And that's some really cool shit.
Yeah, and I think they make different themes for every territory, and I would really recommend people go and check out how they differentiate these different locations. So, like for instance, they incorporate like the very very obvious elements into some of the songs. So, like for the fire area, you hear like smoldering and crackling in the background. That sort
Right.
of really gives you this feeling of heat just from being there, just from like listening to it. And for water, they kind of include like these almost, I'm not quite sure, it's sort of like a deep sea ocean noise because it's not quite like lapping waves or anything quite so obvious. But
A lot of filters.
yeah, they in a way they managed to convey the overall feeling of that faction and what their core belief is just through the music and through the environment of where they live.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the goals of composing for a video game is like whatever song you're going to be using for one certain area or one certain kind of character, one certain scene, it has to evoke the things that is about that, and that's how it is essentially a part of the grand scheme of what this game is portraying and stuff. And like I think this came out in 97. Another thing that I think was very evocative of like the certain areas that it was doing was Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, because you talk about like again I think thinking about what sounds makes you think of fire and stuff, and like so you think of the fire temple and like Dodongo's cavern, and it's brooding and it kind of feels almost magmatic, which probably isn't a word, but like you're actually in this hot ass cavern and you're just trying to get those bombs.
I was thinking about Ocarina of Time as well, because I think that this, like when Alton mentioned it was the life faction, the hand drums and the kind of choral music, it's got that like connected to the earth, connected to the joy of life. That really works. Like I can imagine playing that game and doing whatever kind of tasks you need to do, but listening to that, you feel connected to your faction. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, all of the quests for the Life Clan were just being good Samaritans, helping old ladies cross the street.
Well, they don't really have quests for any of the factions. Really, your only goal is to just murder everyone else and destroy the Lord of Death, Balkoth.
In the name of life.
In the name of life, I'm fucking running you through with my stick.
The United States Defense Department saw this game and took its message whole cloth.
Yeah, we're the faction of freedom, and the most freedom you can be is dead.
The bulwark of life.
The Department of Life, as opposed to the Department of Death. Anyway, I think I don't know what else to say about this game. I really love it. It's on GOG. If you want to check it out, please do, or just check out the music and see how the composer highlights the differences between two opposing factions. And I'm done with that, so would you like to move on to your next pick, Reese?
This one is the newest game up on here. Well, I didn't pick just nostalgic from my childhood because there was a couple other points that I wanted to make, and once we listen to it, I'll get a little bit more into it. But this is from Doom, the remake. The soundtrack is, when I mentioned it to Terry, he implied it was a little cheesy, and that's tough to disagree. But at the same time, I think it works really well for the game, and this is such an iconic moment in the game. It's kind of like as you come up out of the elevator and you have that intro hard rock to kind of introduce you to the world. So let's play it.
Is this the one where he pumps his shotgun? Just like.
Oh yeah.
No
All right.
spoilers. Come
Awesome.
on.
So yeah, short little intro. Like Alton brought up, to me, the reason I picked this one specifically, because this does something that I think is extremely difficult to pull off in games, is to sync up the music to the gameplay in like a very specific, detailed way. Like sometimes, you'll have games where there's a couple of different mixes, and when it gets into combat, it'll fade into the combat mix of the game. And I think that stuff like that is really works well, but it's so hard to sync up correctly. I just find it so compelling when a game is able to do something like that. And for me, Doom and its soundtrack, this really stood out for me as something special. And sorry, continue.
I was gonna say, just that whole point you're saying of having audio sync up with the gameplay, that the music, the score, syncing up with the gameplay that you're experiencing in real time. I think a game that I did not put on my list, but I very much endorse. I think I told you about this a couple weeks ago too. Was Solar Fields' score for Mirror's Edge. I think that whole score is just impeccable. Like you could listen to that whole CD and never play the game, and you could probably like have a good understanding of what that game is if you were just imagining in your head as you're listening to the music.
I think Mirror's Edge is a great example of music that really lines up with the gameplay really well. I went back and listened to it after we talked about it. It's a great soundtrack, but I definitely feel like it definitely has that same kind of feel. And just in general, like I think Doom is a great soundtrack because the game itself has a very, I think, interesting way of dealing with that action gameplay of where unless you're running forward and shooting, if you're not doing that, you're playing the game wrong. And I think that's unlike a lot of first-person shooters that wants you to play like the cover game or like has some other kind of like mechanics.
Like the Gears of War type of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that it's such a simple idea, but a lot of games don't fully embrace it the way Doom does, and that kind of hard, metal aesthetic. In No Clips had a documentary, which at one point that they made was how difficult it was to actually get that shotgun sync, is just because of the way that games work. It's hard to have that like millimeter perfect sync with the animations that are going on. And the second point they make is that the game's soundtrack used to be a lot more subdued, and they didn't want to have that, heavy metal album cover idea from the soundtrack, and the more they just iterate it, they were just like, let's just do this. Let's just go full cheesy metal.
I mean, that's the soundtrack itself also diving headfirst into the action.
Exactly, 100%. And I think that Mick Gordon gave us one of the worst video game moments in music with the "We're Not Gonna Take It" cover at the end of Wolfenstein 2, but this is an excellent achievement in my opinion. And I don't have a lot of extra things to say about it.
Some people may be allowed to have mulligans, who knows? But
yeah.
I think one thing that really ought to be pointed out with this song in particular, and once again highlights the different spread of choices that we picked, is that this when was the Doom remake again? 2016.
Correct.
I mean, it's literally Doom 2016.
Well, there we go. This is one of many examples of the first-person shooters and action video games being based just like in the exact same sphere as action movies and stuff. Because like a song like this, you probably could have heard a handful of years ago in like what's an action movie that people know? Babe Pig in the City? I don't know.
No, that's a romance, you pleb. Babe Pig in the City 2 is the action film.
There we go. That's the gritty reboot. That's what I was thinking of right there. Yeah, but like
my real city pigs will know this.
Stuff like this, you would just imagine hearing in a movie. It's like, oh no, this is in a video game, like, and you're just fucking shooting your guns to it and stuff like that. So it's like, as we've seen, like, it really is just sort of intertwining with one another in like a contemporary age of this stuff of just, it's all guns and violence.
It would have been interesting if we had talked about this immediately after the first chiptune, because when we got into Arcanum and we're talking about chiptunes, for some reason, it's like the music matches the feel of the game. And that's probably the most important thing for video game music to accomplish, is to enhance the feeling of the game. And sort of... and I think that both the Arcanum track and the Doom track, as well as the chiptune track, all sort of match the games that they're tied to, which is, kind of an obvious statement, but not all games manage to quite sync up with their music so well.
Yeah, I would say, and I might have to say this for when we come up to it, because I do know that it's an agenda, but like there are definitely songs that I just feel like are two just very odd choices. It doesn't completely ruin the whole video game track, but there's just some black sheep out there.
Hey everybody, Reese here, cutting in to let you know that we spent such a long time discussing music in this episode, I've decided to cut it into 2 parts. If you're enjoying the discussion, head on over to part 2 of this episode, and if you're not enjoying the discussion, you can go to hell. Alright, later.
That's right! I'm in the house! Here it comes! Extra, read all about it. The best burgers in town from all around. People from around the world come and get it. The line goes around like a merry-go-round. Cut! Yes! You gotta heat! Yes, very good. Heat? Very nicely. And toast! Toast! You got to cook! You're doing good now. Come on and cut! Very nice. You got a heat. Toast. Yes. Toast. Very nice. And now cook. Yes. Right. Burgers, the fries, a shake or a friend. If you're hungry, simply line up at the end. Come on, people, gather round. We got everything you want from all around. Cut the lettuce. Cut the lettuce. You got to heat the grill. Heat the grill. Yeah. Toast the buns. My buns are very toasty. Toast the buns. Cook the patties. Cook the patties. Serve the drinks. Serve them. Serve the drinks. Hurry up. And melt the cheese. Ow. Melt the cheese. French the fries. French the fries. French them. Sweep the floor. the salt and the pepper. Pour it on right, guys, we got no extra. You watch the grill, control the flame, guys. Follow the rules, stay productive and wise, and cook those burgers.
Cook those burgers.
Turn the patty over.
Turn the patty over.
Hey, come on and watch them fries. I'm not
Watch
kidding.
them fries.
Better execute sooner.
Better execute sooner.
Bring on the ketchup.
Bring on the ketchup.
Don't forget the cheese.
Don't forget the cheese.
Bring on the mustard.
Bring on the mustard.
Handle it with ease.
Handle it with ease.
Burgers is all we have in mind. We cook the best, taste better in mind. Now put it on the tray, is it for here or to go? Any which way it tastes good, you know. Cook those burgers, turn the patty over.
Cook those burgers. Turn the patty over.
And cut the lettuce, don't forget the cheese.
Cut the lettuce. Don't forget the cheese.
Toast the buns, French the fries.
Toast the buns,
come on,
French the
and
fries.
Bring on the ketchup, sweep the floors.
Bring on the ketchup. Sweep the floors.
Yeah, now that's what I'm talking about. Now go serve those burgers right now.
All right. I'm off to a good start.